Good morning. With God's help, we're finishing this this speech that the Rebbe gave in 1991, talking about this week's Torah portion, Torah reading, Bahalotcha. And Bahalotcha begins with the lighting of the candles, the menorah in the Holy Temple. In the menorah, there were 7 branches to the menorah, and Aaron would light them. And the Rebbe stresses that there's one detail that has to really be internalized by us, and that is that Aaron lighting the lamps is the same thing as the Rebbe inspiring souls of Jews to want to raise up, to not be so influenced by the world, and to influence the world by being connected to the creator of the world and the Torah and his commandments. Raising up. And the Rebbe stressed even more what Rashi explains, that Balotcha, that it says to Aaron, the commandment was not, doesn't use the word to light the lights, but to raise up the lights. He says, what does it mean to raise up? The Balotcha means that the Aaron has to be sure that the flame goes up and it's on its own. And from this, the Rebbe says that's one of the big accomplishments of the leaders of our generation, the true Jewish leaders, more exactly the Rebbe himself, and that is to inspire Jews that they become flames, they illuminate their surrounding, and that they go up, that they increase all the time in their influence on themselves and on the world, and also in holy things they deal with, the Torah and commandment, they increase all the time. And also that it should be al me'aleha, that the inspiration should come from within themselves. Okay, how can this inspiration come from within yourself? So the answer is that that's who yourself really is. The essence of what a Jew is these 3 things. The essence of a Jew is precisely these 3 things: to serve God, to be connected with God, to fix up the world, and to always be increasing in holiness in our attitude toward the Torah, toward its commandments, and the observance of Torah, in the practice of the commandments, and to always imbue it more with soul. And there's to reveal our soul. That's going to be the job. Especially to work on the world. The Jewish people are here. Abraham was the first Jew, and he was not a person that just found the key to go to heaven and how you can save yourself or how you can bring others with you into the realms of the afterworld of salvation. No, Abraham's job he realized his purpose as a Jew, as a human being, to fix up and put meaning into every detail of this physical world, to make the world holy, because the world is a creation of God. And God is creating it all the time. That was the job of a Jew. Okay, so that's one thing we said. Going up constantly, illuminating your surrounding, yourself, the holy things you do. And then the Rebbe pointed out another thing about this week's Torah portion, and that is that it divides the Torah, according to some opinion, that it divides the book of Numbers into 3 books. That the book of Numbers itself, according to some opinions, is divided into 3 books, thereby making the Torah not 5 books of Moses, but 7 books of Moses. How does it divide it into 3 books? And right near the end, actually, this week's Torah portion, there's 2 sentences talking about how the ark, when they traveled in the desert, that the ark would raise up and it would destroy all of the things that were damaging to the Jewish people, snakes, the scorpions, the mountains, every difficulties, the ark would deal with. 2 sentences that talk about how the ark floated in front of the Jews in front of when they were traveling in the desert and did away with all their enemies. Some people say that those two sentences are a book in themselves. And that divides, if so, the book of Numbers into three books. What's before that? In the book of Numbers, the sentence, the chapter we just learned about counting the Jews, etc. That itself, those two sentences themselves, and then all the chapters which come after, which basically are all sort of negative things. All the chapters will come after, beginning with the end of this week's chapter, which is how the people were complaining to Moshe, and then after that, we'll learn next week about the terrible episode of the spies. The Jews refused to enter into Israel. And then after that, the next chapter, we learn about Korach, that they made a big war against Moses. Right? Moses. So basically bad things. So that's what the Rebbe is going to say. Let's go. Achiluk, the difference between these two types of ways of serving God, namely serving with yourself, working on yourself, working on the world, or in more detailed, working in holy things and working with the world. Right? Two ways in general, dividing, working on yourself and working with the world. This is like the difference between the 5 books and the 7 books. Right? A person has to first of all work on himself, purify himself, and then purify the world. Just like it is in holiness, therefore, and from it comes down into, let's read this. Whether the Jewish people, whether the Torah is divided into 2 ways of dividing, 7 and 5. 7 are, for instance, we have the 7 the arms of the menorah, right? Of the menorah in the Holy Temple. There were 7 lamps on it. Keneged Sheva Sugim, this is corresponding to the 7 different types of the souls of Jews, which correspond to the 7 emotional qualities. There's some Jews that are more inclined to serve God from love, some more from fear. Some are good at connecting others. Some are good at controlling, doing things, getting things done. Al derech zeh yeshnu, that's what's called the 7 emotional traits of God, which are also found in the 7 emotional traits of every single Jew, which is found in basically in everything in the world. The Jews are supposed to transform the whole business into holiness. So there's 7 different ways of serving God. That's represented by the 7 lamps in the tabernacle. Al derech zeh, similarly, there's the Jewish people can be divided into 7, but they can also be divided into 5 levels. That corresponds to the 5 books of the Torah. We can say that this is also hinted at this Torah portion. 5 pupils, it says, we're learning in Pirkei Avot. It says that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 pupils. It's into the 2nd chapter of Pirkei Avot, right? Correct? Five pupils had Rabbi Shimon. I'm sorry, I forgot. The Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 pupils. Is it the second? I'm sorry, give me one moment here. Second chapter of Pirkei Avot. There were 5 pupils for Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And we're born to explain We can say that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that he was the head of the Sanhedrin. He lived in the time of the Holy Temple was destroyed. The second Holy Temple was destroyed. I'm sorry. That Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he escaped from Jerusalem and went to the leader of the Romans who was about to destroy Israel, about to destroy the Holy Temple to Jerusalem, and he asked him for a favor that he should save Yavne and the wise men. He realized he couldn't ask for too much or he wouldn't give him anything. So he said that, and from that, the Torah continues to this very day. If the Romans would have killed all of the wise men, then there would have been no one to carry on the teachings of the Torah to the next generation. So that's what he asked for, all the people of the Torah, and it was given to him. So till this very day, he had more than 5 pupils. But what it means that these 5 people, all of his pupils, could be divided into 5 different levels. Okay, so in other words, you can divide the Jews into 7, corresponding to what we just said, 7 different ways of serving God, or into 5 categories. So it is also the Torah. We can say it can be divided into 7 books or 5 books. Now listen to this. One of the differences between them is like this. The number 5 is mostly dealing with holy things. 7 deals with working in the world. According to this and also we can see there's different ways of dividing what's called the emotional qualities of God. The 5 top emotions, from what's called chesed until hod, that's the main emotions. Hod is what's called the end of the emotional qualities of God, and also, but the 6 and 7, that deals with the world. Yesod and Malchut. This is one of the differences between the Jewish people as they are divided into 7 levels, and how they are divided, which correspond to the 7 lamps, and how they are divided. And Shazed, this includes all the levels of the Jewish people, even the lowest levels of the Jews. All 7 levels, even the lowest 2, that deal only with the world. This corresponds to the number 6 and number 7. That's what Yesod and Malchut. These are people that are connected totally to the world. And there's another way of dividing the Jews, how they're divided into 5. That's like the 5 books of the Torah. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Everything is holy. That's holiness. So 7 is how holiness comes into the world. The last 2 aspects of godliness, Yesod and Malchut, that's how God is in the world, hidden in the world. And the number 5 is before, so to speak, God is hidden in the world. That's spiritual. Al derech zeh, the difference between the Torah, how it's divided usually into 5 books of the Torah, and that's how everyone learns the Torah. 5 books of Moses, right? Since the main thing of the Torah is holy. But because the Torah also has to work in the world and has to deal with negative things, and sometimes even the most negative things, the whole purpose of the Torah is given only to make peace in the world. And therefore, Yeshna, there's a difference. Sometimes the Torah is divided into 7. Because the last 2 levels, 6 and 7, this talks about connecting to the world. This is especially relevant to our Torah portion this week, which divides the Torah into 2 additional books. The 7 books of the Torah. We have up to these 2 sentences about Vayi bin Soharon. That's, so to speak, according to this new division, that's the first 4 books of the Torah. Vayi bin Soharon, these 2 sentences, that's the 5th book. And the 6th and the 7th is the end of this book of Numbers and the whole book of Deuteronomy, which the end of this week's Torah portion and all the other chapters that come after it in this book of Numbers, which that will constitute the sixth book of the Torah according to this new division. It's almost all negative things. And the whole book of Deuteronomy is also basically negative things. The book of Deuteronomy is Moses chastising the Jewish people before they went into the land of Israel, reminding them of all of the terrible things that they did in the desert. We'll see. Let's see. The first 5 books of the Torah, according to this new division, is generally in their names: Breshit, Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Vayihi bin Soar Oram. This week's Torah, the 2 sentences which constitute, according to this new division, the 5th book of the Torah. These are mainly in with holy things. 5, holy number, creating the world, the Jewish people leaving Egypt, God called Moses, counting the number of Jews in the desert, and the ark, these 2 sentences, that's the 5th book of the Torah now, right? Is that when the ark traveling in the desert, right? Those are all holy things, which is not the case according to this new division. What's going to be the 6th book and the 7th book? The 6th book that begins, according to this, with the Jewish people complaining, and after that talks about the sin of Miriam. We didn't learn that in our classes because we just didn't have enough time. And after that, it talks about, next week, it talks about the sin of the spies. And then in the chapter after that talks about Korach, that the whole Jewish people rebelled against Moses. And also the last book of the Torah, which now becomes the 7th book. This is the book of Deuteronomy. This is Divrei Tochachot. This is all words of reproof. That Moses is chastising the Jews because of what they did. It's talking about how the Jews sinned in the desert, and Moses is constantly reminding them. Kevin says, Shemiah Sefer Shishi, since the 6th book of the Torah is made a possibility of bad things in the world. Right? From after almost the whole Torah, after these 2 sentences, which constitute, according to this, the 5th book of the Torah, these 2 sentences about the ark traveling in the desert, everything after that is negative, because that's the way God created the world. And that's one of the purposes of the Torah, is to come and fix this up so there won't be bad things in the world. The Torah is not here in order to get us out of the world and save us and get us up into heaven. That's not the purpose of the world. In fact, that's part of the bad. That's part of the negative, abandoning the world. Right? Let the non-believers die in the darkness. What do we care? No, the purpose is not just, and not only to elevate the whole world, that they realize that there's God, not only the people, but the animals, everything. It says that the animals will be different. It says a lamb with a lion. And therefore, the new, now according to our new numbering of 7 books, so the 6th and the 7th book, they begin with Yerida B'Torah Atzmo. In the Torah itself, it starts dealing with purely negative things. But because it's written in the Torah, so everything is holy. Al-Derek, like it says, Yaakov V'Esav, like it says, Yaakov V'Esav, Menorah B'Parsha. Earlier, it says that because the Torah talks about Yaakov, and because it talks about Esav, and it talks about Paro, and it talks about Lavan, so these things are mentioned in the Torah. It means that we must have power to elevate them, right? But in the Torah there, it talks about how it all came out good, right? Paro in the end was decimated, but the portions of the Torah that talk about afterwards, the whole entire portion of the Torah after this, the ark, it's just talking about bad things, right? Next week, you'll see it goes into tremendous detail about how exactly the Jewish people rebelled against Moses and they didn't want to go to Israel, and what they said and what Moses said back and what they replied and how Moses told them, and then they got punished. It's just saying that those things that happened in the Torah after these 2 sentences, that according to this new division make the 5th book of the Torah, this shows that how in the Torah itself, there is a possibility to fix up negative things. But on the other side, Sefer Torah. True, it talks about bad things, right? How the Jews rebelled against Moses and etc. But it's on the other hand, it's part of the Torah, and the Torah is a holy book. The Torah is God Himself. And even more. Sefer Zeh, this book, Matchil v'kolel b'tocho et Parshat Balut Chatanerot. This book, this chapter, which is according to this new way of divides the Torah into into 7. In other words, this Torah portion, Balotcha, it itself is the end of the 4th book, the entirety of the 5th book, and the beginning of the 6th book of the Torah, namely purely good things and something bad. Hakolel adlakas kol nerot is talking about the Torah portion is called Balotcha, lighting the 7 lamps. We said 7. The last 2 numbers of the 7 emotions, the last 2 of the 7 emotions are dealing with bad things. So it's talking about illuminating all these bad things as well. The number 7, we say, is how the number 5, which is holiness, comes into the physical world. That's the not holiness. And that's part of this week's Torah portion, which is talking about illuminating everything, making everything reveal the godliness in it. Everything on its own will reveal God. This gives the power that the light of God, near mitzvah Torah or, will reach to the lowest places. Like we said, the Jewish people complained. And this thing, by the way, of the Jewish people complaining, I sort of regret we didn't have the time to really go over this. We touched on it a little bit this week. But it says that the reason the Jewish people complained was just because they just wanted to complain. And that was the last thing that Moses expected. Last thing he expected. He had done so much for the Jews, took them all out of Egypt, saved them, gave them bread from heaven, gave them water from a rock. And the last, he thought maybe somebody wouldn't say thank you. Could be, but somebody complaining. And everyone complaining. It says that it was the Erev Rav, essentially, was complaining. But everybody nobody took Moses' side. Complaining, how could it be? Says that because that God wanted that there should be in the Torah negative things, and it'll be part of this chapter, which talks about lighting the lamps and lighting the lamps until even these negative things, all 7, even though the last 2, will cause the world to elevate on its own, to reveal the godliness on it. The Rebbe brought out, he said that when God created the world, so it says in the Torah that on the 7th day of creation, 6th day of creation, after God finished creating everything, so it said God saw everything He did, and it was very good. It said it was very good. So it says that sense that He made, it could be explained that this sense was even after Adam ate from the tree. Everything was very good. So in other words, this world potentially is very good. Now, very good, not just good. Going to heaven is good. Heaven, it says it's purely good. Heaven, nothing like going to heaven, sort of. Heaven is good. This world is very good. How can this world be very good? It's got all these sins and terrible things in it. Making mistakes, people get punished afterwards. What could be good about doing sins? It says, no, exactly the opposite. This world is very good because it takes a special connection and power and purity and honesty and selflessness in order to correct the world. That the world doesn't pull us in or drive us away. To be fully involved in the world the way God wants us to. That's given us the power. The power is given in the Torah. That's what's called tshuva. That's what's called returning everything back to its true state. Essentially, everything is good. Essentially, God is creating everything. Essentially, everything is revealing the Creator. Everything is essentially healthy, right? Like people that go, the Rebbe said that you shouldn't call, in Israel, they call hospitals Beit Cholim, the house of sick people. And the Rebbe says, not so. It should be a house of healing. Beit Refuah. Everyone essentially is healthy. Just that sometimes people get sick from side reasons, whatever it is, but you just want to reveal the true essence of a person is to be healthy. They don't go into a hospital and the doctors say, oh, just some people are healthy and some people aren't. I don't know what you want. What's the problem? Let's say that's healthy. Right? Nowadays, they're calling all sorts of weird aberrations healthy. It's just health. That's the way to cure it. Right? How do you cure homosexuality? He's healthy. That's okay. That's the way he is. How do you cure idolatry? That's the way. That's good. Idolatry is okay. Right? Everything is all right. Well, that's sick because it's not so. The fact of the matter is that a healthy person wants to have a family, wants to have a children. That's a healthy person, and everybody essentially is healthy. Right? Everyone essentially is healthy. Idolatry, everyone essentially wants to worship the Creator. Everyone. But there's idolatry that's sticking a person, sticking a this, a thing, and an idol up there. Right? That's what's called like a sickness. Tshuva means to return back to a healthy state, to who you are. And then you can be functional. You can express all the potential that God put in you. That's what's called tshuva. Until shleimus tshuva, love, every creation will recognize its creator. By means of this, makes olam me'ala, means that the whole world, and especially all humanity, will elevate themselves on their own. When a person realizes his soul, then he, on his own, he'll want to get closer to God. Now, there's some people that exactly the opposite. The more they feel God, the more destructive they become. You can see, like in the 80 years ago, all the Nazis, right? The Nazis, tremendous, intelligent people, cultured people, progressive people. They had the books of philosophy, nothing like it, right? With ethics or other things like that. And the closer they got to feeling God as a creator and truth, the more evil they were. The more evil. There's such a thing. There is such a thing, but it's rare. Those are the people, they won't even want to be in the same world where the Jews and God are ruling. They won't want to be. I don't know what's going to be with them. Okay. Hamala she'aya me'alea ba al yedei tshuva. This comes by means of what's called tshuva. Now, according to Judaism, if a person sins, worse sins, how does he fix it up? By simply saying, listen, it was a mistake. I'm sorry, God, I made a big mistake. I won't do it again. I promise. I'll try. To return to this true identity. I'm a creation of God. I messed it up. I'm sorry. That's it. Fixes a person up. It's a little bit deeper than that, but that's the essential. Shalonim sides al tzadikim. This is the thing which totally righteous people don't have this. The Bali Tshuva says the place where a person who returns to God, who did bad and returns to God, this is even higher than a person that never did any bad at all. It says that even the purposeful sins, they become like merits. Until they become not just like merits, they become merits. Why? Because by means of the bad things, he comes to this tremendous love. He realizes, wow, I trusted myself and I thought that I was God and it worked okay for a while. And suddenly I realized it wasn't working at all. I was on the wrong track. I was doing terrible things. I thought that I was flying high. Suddenly I realized I was totally wrong. So, God, will you forgive me? The answer is, of course. A person that says, I'm changing my ways, I'm changing my heart, God forgives him. That's it. That's the way Judaism works. Of course, if you steal money, you got to give the money back. There's some sins that, God forbid, you killed somebody, you can't bring the person back. So those things that are going to make always a stain. But nevertheless, the essential connection with God can be fixed up. Maybe we can even say that this is the reason that in the beginning of the 6th book of the Torah, according to this new division, it starts off with the end of this week's Torah portion, that the Jews started complaining. A whole book that starts off with these negative words, Vayehi ha'am, and it was that the people were complaining. It says all these 3 words are bad words. Vayehi means that something bad is going to happen. Ha'am is talking about sinners, and kamit onanim means complaining. A bad thing, the Torah starting off with a book of the Torah starting off with something bad. says Zeh Katuv in Parshas Balotcha. That's why it's written in this week's Torah portion, which is entitled "Making the flames of the lamps in the tabernacle raise up." Why? Because everything, even the bad things, are under this general title of making everything, lighting up everything, and that it raises up. Because the whole reason the Torah tells us these negative things is in order to give us the power from the Torah to do what's called tshuva, to return to our true identity, that we're creations of God. Like it says, it says that the people were like complainers. Why? Because Bnei Israel, the Jewish people, they can't be really complaining. They're just something like complainers. The true reason is that why are they doing bad things? The true reason is that God brought them to this so that they'll repent. They'll return back to their senses. From this is drawn the power to work in the world and to also transform not just ourselves, but also the world, even the lowest things in the world, that they can shine on their own. We say this in our Aleinu prayer every day, that all of the world will recognize Yifnu Elecha Kol Rish E'oretz, even the evil people will turn to you, God. The power to this comes from the 5 books of the Torah, namely what? The 5th book, the new. Now it's the 5th book, according to this new division. These 2 sentences, which now have become a book of the Torah, according to this new division. And what are these 2 sentences? Vayehi bin Sora Oron, when the ark with the tablets, the broken tablets, traveled in front of them, Moshe said, Kumo Hashem v'yafutzu avecha, raise up, God, and scatter your enemies, v'yanusu misanecha, and those who hate you will flee before you. Namely, all of the evil things, birur hala'umatzeh, all of the evil things will become refined. And even more, birur hala'umatzeh, benocha, when the ark stopped moving, Yomar, it said, Moses said, Shuva Hashem, return, God, Rivavot Alfe Yisrael. What is it? Here it says 22,000 Jews. Maybe the revelation of the Shekhinah. So first of all, it's talking about, these 2 sentences are talking about the power that we have to refine all the things which are spoken about after these 2 sentences. What's now called the 6th and the 7th book of the Torah. All the negative things. The Jews not wanting to go into Israel, Korach, etc. Making a rebellion against Moses. Now the Jews, because of the Torah, we have the power to refine the world and to reveal godliness in the world. So now we can understand another thing. On Shabbat, so we read the Torah twice. First of all, we read the weekly portion. That's in the daytime prayer. And then in the afternoon prayer, there's 4 prayers in Shabbat. The evening prayer, 2 prayers in the daytime, what's called the regular prayer, and the additional prayer, Musaf. And then there's what's called the afternoon prayer. Now, afternoon prayer, we read the Torah again. But there we read just the first reading, 1/7 of next week's Torah reading. Next week's Torah reading is about the story about the spies, Parsha Shalach. Moses wants the Jews to go into the land of Israel. God wants the Jews to go into the land of Israel. The Jews want to go into the land of Israel. But first of all, they send what's called scouts to scout out the land, just to understand, what's the best approach to take and whatever. And the scouts come back and they convince all of the Jewish people not to go into the land of Israel. Don't listen to Moses. We're not going in. And everybody agrees. It says the women didn't agree with it. Now, this is a terrible thing. I mean, the whole, there's no excuse for it, right? Well, the Rebbe gives an excuse. He explains why. And he explains that the Jewish people really had holy intentions. They didn't want to go into the land of Israel because they thought it would disturb them from learning Torah and from being holy, that they would get caught up in the world. And so that's why but nevertheless, it's a negative thing, that all their calculations were wrong. So similarly, we can understand regarding to the spies, how could it be that the Torah tells us such a bad thing? And number two, the Haftorah of this Torah portion next week is talking about Yehoshua, that Yehoshua, he also sends spies, right? Moses, these spies, this was the beginning of the 40 years. And because of these spies, they wandered for 40 years. At the end of the 40 years, Moses dies, and the Jewish people go into Israel. They're led by Yehoshua, Joshua. And Joshua also sent in spies. But his spies were successful. And the Rebbe gives all sorts of reasons. So he says, I want to be short because we haven't got time. So that's the whole point, that Moses inspired Joshua to the point where he was like a flame that went up on his own. And therefore, Joshua was able to succeed in a place where Moses did not succeed. He was even increasing. This is a flame going up on his own. And of course, what was his purpose? His purpose was to conquer the land of Israel. The land of Israel, they had to fight a lot of battles over there. And so to deal with the bad. So it says the Jewish people under Moses, they refused to go into the land of Israel. They had their excuses. They wanted to be in the desert where God was providing for them and they wouldn't forget about God. But it was a big mistake. That was bad. But nevertheless, included in this bad, that's the whole next week's Torah portion, is the ability to fix it up. And that's exactly what Joshua did. He fixed it up. He also sent in spies, but his spies were sent in with a different attitude and they were successful. And so it is with us. The Torah gives us the power that even if we made the worst mistakes, is that we can fix up the mistakes. We can fix up our attitude. We can return ourselves, the people around us, and the whole entire world to the truth, that there's a creator, and the creator gives us infinite potential to do good. And we, because of our mistaken identities and our mistaken directions and our confusion, as we do exactly the opposite. If so, you might think I'm helpless. Says the Torah, you're not helpless. Making mistakes, doing bad things is written in the Torah. And with the power of the Torah, a person can correct any bad things that he does, even if it's idolatry. And that's the lesson that we can learn from this week's Torah portion, a very good one, that everything can be by means of tshuva, by means of returning back to our true source and realizing who we are, as we can fix up all of the mistakes that we've made. Okay, let's do the Yom Yom. Very good. Thank you very much. Let's go Yom Yom. There's more to this, by the way, but we haven't got time to do it. Hebrew. This is the previous Rebbe is saying that his father said, his father was the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, the Rebbe Shalom Dovber. Serving God according to Chassidut has all sorts of levels. The level of being dead doesn't need much elaboration. Talks about a person that has no feeling, right? A dead person. He's only thinking about himself. He's got no feeling, he's got no sense. But there's also what's called the raising of the dead. And that's also a type of a spiritual service. A corpse is cold. There's nothing colder than intellect. Human intellect is totally cold. When one's natural intelligence comprehends a godly concept, I mean, like the first ones to join in Hitler and his ideas of killing the whole world were all the big professors over there in Germany. And Trump, tremendously intellectual people and scientists and this, and they embraced his idea of world conquest. It meant you had to kill millions of innocent people. I think they killed like 25 million Russians for absolutely no reason. People, French, how many they killed? I don't know. People in France, people that never did anything to them. They already planned out how they were going to kill them, made these amazing weapons of destruction before there was a war. Even they already had all the bombs and all the plans. They were training pilots to kill people. Nobody dreamed they were going to do such. Intellect is cold. Intellect can be the coldest, is like dead. When a person's natural intelligence, when that dead intelligence comprehends something godly, then the emotions which are concealed in that intellect are enthused and moved by the pleasure within intellect. In other words, let's take this Nazi, right? And all of a sudden he says, listen, you have your children, you love your children. Of course I do. You have a dog, you love it. Of course, my dog, I love it. Dog, what's the question? Well, I mean, why are you killing so many dogs and so many people? These are also people, they're strangers. Well, you should know that today they bombed by mistake, right? A city where your son was in with your dog. And you're like, what? They killed my little Fritzy and my dog. Oh, he starts to cry. So we see, oh, you do have a little bit of intellect. Maybe this idea of world conquest in order to make Germany big, but you're killing people. You're killing your own children. Why? Well, all of a sudden, within the intellect awakens a little bit of emotion. And how much more so if you say, listen, everything is a creation of God. It's God's handiwork. As much as you love your dog, God infinitely more loves every human being. As much as you value a precious picture, whatever it is, of Leonardo da Vinci has a picture that's worth $5 billion, right? Well, how much more so every human being is valuable to God? When a person starts to realize that, that's really the true revival of the dead. You start to value everything in the world. That's today. Now let's do tomorrow, Shabbat. Oh. My father wrote in a letter, you should love criticism. If people criticize you, then love, because it'll place you on true heights. Being criticized is a very good thing. Why? Because if the person is right, so you have to change yourself. He's doing you a favor. He's telling you something's wrong. If the person is wrong, so you don't have to take him seriously. But in any case, there's no reason to get angry, right? Someone comes up to you and says, you're ugly. Famous joke about a person goes to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist says, I'm sorry to tell you, Mr. Groys, but you're a paranoid schizophrenic. He said, well, I think I'm going to go and get another opinion. The doctor says, oh, you want another opinion? You're ugly. Right? Give him another opinion. You should cherish criticism. If the person is right, then you should fix yourself up. If he's not, then it's his problem. Have a good Shabbat with Moshiach now. God bless us all, and may we all be together with the Moshiach on Sunday at 8:15 in the morning. Shabbat Shalom.